GAITEN Academy, Chapter 15. You note the red lamps, don't you? The head asked in his carrying, I will be heard all the way to the back of the lecture hall voice. I count at least 63. Hush up, Tom hissed. He did everything but clap a hand over the old man's mouth. The head looked at him calmly. Have you forgotten what I said last night about musical chairs, Tom? Tom, Clay, and Ardai were standing just beyond the turnstiles with the tawny field archway at their backs. Alice had stayed at Cheatham Lodge with Jordan by mutual agreement. The music currently drifting up from the prep school soccer field was a jazz instrumental version of The Girl from Ipanema. Clay thought it was probably cutting-edge stuff if you were a phone crazy. No, Tom said. As long as the music doesn't stop, we have nothing to worry about. I just don't want to be the guy who gets his throat torn out by an insomniac exception to the rule. You won't. How can you be so positive, sir? Tom asked. Because, to make a small literary pun, we cannot call it sleep. Come. He started down the concrete ramp the players once took to reach the field, saw that Tom and Clay were hanging back, and looked at them patiently. Little knowledge is gained without risk, he said. And at this point, I would say knowledge is critical, wouldn't you? Come. They followed his rapping cane down the ramp toward the field, Clay a little ahead of Tom. Yes, he could see the red power lamps of the boomboxes circling the field. 60 or 70 looked about right. Good-sized sound systems spotted at 10 or 15-foot intervals, each one surrounded with bodies. By starlight, those bodies were an eye-boggling sight. They weren't stacked, each had his or her own space, but not so much as an inch had been wasted. Even the arms had been interwoven so that the impression was one of paper dolls carpeting the field, rank on rank. Wow, that music, like something you'd hear in a supermarket, Clay thought, rose in the dark. Something else rose as well, a sallow smell of dirt and rotting vegetables, with a thicker odor of human waste and putrefaction lingering just beneath. The head skirted the goal, which had been pushed aside, overturned, its netting shredded. Here, where the lake of bodies started, lay a young man of about 30, with jagged bite marks running up one arm to the sleeve of his NASCAR t-shirt. The bites looked infected. In one hand he held a red cap that made Clay think of Alice's pet sneaker. He stared dully up at the stars as Bette Midler once more began singing about the wind beneath her wings. Hi, the head cried in his rusty, piercing voice. He poked the young man briskly in the middle with the tip of his cane, pushing in until the young man broke wind. Hi, I say. Stop it, Tom almost groaned. The head gave him a look of tight-lipped scorn, then worked the tip of his cane into the cap the young man was holding. He flicked it away. The cap sailed about 10 feet and landed on the face of a middle-aged woman. Clay watched, fascinated, as it slid partially aside, revealing one rapt and blinkless eye. The young man reached up with dreamy slowness and clutched the hand that had been holding the cap into a fist. Then he subsided. He thinks he's holding it again? Clay whispered, fascinated. "Perhaps," the head replied, without much interest. He poked the tip of his cane against one of the young man's infected bites. It should have hurt like hell, but the young man didn't react, only went on staring up at the sky as Bette Midler gave way to Dean Martin. I could put my cane right through his throat, and he wouldn't try to stop me. Nor would those around him spring to his defense, although in the daytime I have no doubt they'd tear me limb from limb. Tom was squatting by one of the ghetto blasters. "There are batteries in this," he said. "I can tell by the weight." "Yes, in all of them. They do seem to need batteries." The head considered, then added something Clay could have done without. "At least so far." "We could wade right in, couldn't we?" Clay said. "We could wipe them out the way hunters exterminated passenger pigeons back in the 1880s. The head nodded. "Bashed their little brains out as they sat on the ground, didn't they? Not a bad analogy, but I'd make slow work of it with my cane. You'd make slow work of it even with your automatic weapon, I'm afraid." "I don't have enough bullets in any case. There must be..." Clay ran his eye over the packed bodies again. Looking at them made his head hurt. "There must be 600 or 700. And that's not even counting the ones under the bleachers." "Sir? Mr. Arday?" It was Tom. How did I determine the depth of this trance state? Is that what you're asking me?" Tom nodded. "I came out the first night to observe. The flock was much smaller then, of course. I was drawn to them out of simple but overwhelming curiosity. Jordan wasn't with me. Switching to a nighttime existence has been rather hard for him, I'm afraid." "You risked your life, you know," Clay said. "I had little choice," the head replied. "It was like being hypnotized. I quickly grasped the fact that they were unconscious even though their eyes were open, and a few simple experiments with the tip of my cane confirmed the depth of the state." Clay thought of the head's limp, thought of asking him if he'd considered what would have happened to him if he'd been wrong and they'd come after him, and held his tongue. The head would no doubt reiterate what he'd already said: no knowledge obtained without risk. Jordan was right. This was one very old-school dude. Clay certainly wouldn't have wanted to be 14 and standing on his disciplinary carpet. Arday, meanwhile, was shaking his head at him. 600 or 700's a very low estimate, Clay. This is a regulation-sized soccer field. That's 6,000 square yards. How many? The way they're packed together, I should say 1,000 at the very least. And they're not really here at all, are they? You're sure of that? I am, and what comes back a little more each day. Jordan says the same, and he's an acute observer. You may trust me on that. Is not what they were, which is to say, not human. Can we go back to the lodge now? Tom asked. He sounded sick. Of course, the head agreed. Just a second, Clay said. He knelt beside the young man in the NASCAR t-shirt. He didn't want to do it. He couldn't help thinking that the hand which had clutched for the red cap would now clutch at him. But he made himself. Down here at ground level, the stink was worse. He had believed he was getting used to it, but he had been wrong. Tom began, "Clay, what are you—" "Quiet." Clay leaned toward the young man's mouth, which was partly open. He hesitated, then made himself lean closer until he could see the dim shine of spit on the man's lower lip. At first, he thought it might only be his imagination, but another 2 inches. He was now almost close enough to kiss the not sleeping thing with Ricky Craven on its chest. Took care of that. "It's just little," Jordan had said, not hardly a whisper, "but you can hear it." Clay heard it. The vocal by some chick, just a syllable or 2 ahead of the one coming from the linked boomboxes. Dean Martin singing "Everybody Loves Somebody Sometime." He stood up, nearly screaming at the pistol-shot sound of his own knees cracking. Tom held up his lantern, looking at him, stare-eyed. What? You're not going to say that kid was—" Clay nodded. "Come on, let's go back." Halfway up the ramp, he grabbed the head roughly by the shoulder. Ardate turned to face him, seemingly not disturbed to be handled so. "You're right, sir. We have to get rid of them, as many as we can, and as fast as we can. This may be the only chance we get. Or do you think I'm wrong?" "No," the head replied. "Unfortunately, I don't. As I said, this is war, or so I believe, and what one does in war is kill one's enemies. Why don't we go back and talk it over? We could have hot chocolate. I like a tiny splash of bourbon in mine, barbarian that I am." At the top of the ramp, Clay spared one final look back. Tunnyfield was dark, but under strong northern starlight, not too dark to make out the carpet of bodies spread from end to end and side to side. He thought, you might not know what you were looking at if you just happened to stumble on it, but once you did. His eyes played him a funny trick, and for a moment he almost thought he could see them breathing, all 800 or 1,000 of them, as one organism. That frightened him badly, and he turned to catch up to Tom and Headmaster Araday, almost running. Chapter 16. The head made hot chocolate in the kitchen, and they drank it in the formal parlor by the light of 2 gas lanterns. Clay thought the old man would suggest they go out to Academy Avenue later on, trolling for more volunteers in Arday's army, but he seemed satisfied with what he had. The gasoline pump at the motor pool, the head told them, drew from a 400-gallon overhead tank. All they'd have to do was pull a plug. And there were 30-gallon sprayers in the greenhouse, at least a dozen. They could load up a pickup truck with them, perhaps, and back it down one of the ramps. "Wait," Clay said, "before we start talking strategy, if you have a theory about all this, sir, I'd like to hear it." "Nothing so formal," the old man said, "but Jordan and I have observation. We have intuition, and we have a fair amount of experience between the 2 of us." "I'm a computer geek," Jordan said over his mug of hot chocolate. Clay found the child's glum assurance oddly charming. "A total McNerd. Been on 'em my whole life, just about. Those things are rebooting, all right. They might as well have software installation, please stand by, blinking on their foreheads. I don't understand you, Tom said. I do, Alice said. Jordan, you think the pulse really was a pulse, don't you? Everyone who heard it, they got their hard drives wiped. Well, yeah, Jordan said. He was too polite to say, well, duh. Tom looked at Alice, perplexed. Only Clay knew Tom wasn't dumb, and he didn't believe Tom was that slow. You had a computer, Alice said. I saw it in your little office. Yes. And you've installed software, right? Sure, but... Tom stopped, looking at Alice fixedly. She looked back. Their brains? You mean their brains? What do you think a brain is? Jordan said. A big old hard drive. Organic circuitry. No one knows how many bytes. Say giga to the power of a Googleplex. An infinity of bytes. He put his hands to his ears, which were small and neatly made, right in between here. I don't believe it, Tom said, but he spoke in a small voice, and there was a sick look on his face. Clay thought he did believe it. Thinking back to the madness that had convulsed Boston, Clay had to admit the idea was persuasive. It was also terrible. Millions, perhaps even billions of brains, all wiped clean at the same time, the way you could wipe an old-fashioned computer disk with a powerful magnet. He found himself remembering Pixie Dark, the friend of the girl with the peppermint-colored cell phone. Who are you? What's happening? Pixie Dark had cried. Who are you? Who am I? Then she had smacked herself repeatedly in the forehead with the heel of her hand and had gone running full tilt into a lamppost. Not once, but twice, smashing her expensive orthodontic work to jagged pieces. Who are you? Who am I? It hadn't been her cell phone. She'd only been listening in and hadn't gotten a full dose. Clay, who thought in images rather than words a good deal of the time, now got a vivid mental picture of a computer screen filling up with those words. Who are you? Who am I? 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 And finally, at the bottom, as bleak and inarguable as Pixie Dark's fate, system failure. Pixie Dark is a partially wiped hard drive. It was horrible, but it felt like the stone truth. I majored in English, but as a young man, I read a great deal of psychology, the head told them. I began with Freud. Of course, everyone begins with Freud. Then Jung, Adler. Worked my way around the whole ball field from there. Lurking behind all theories of how the mind works is a greater theory, Darwin's. In Freud's vocabulary, the idea of survival as the prime directive is expressed by the concept of the id. In Jung's, by the rather grander idea of blood consciousness. Neither man, I think, would argue with the idea that if all conscious thought, all memory, all ratiocinative ability were to be stripped from a human mind in a moment, what would remain would be pure and terrible. He paused, looking around for a comment. None of them said anything. The head nodded as if satisfied and resumed. Although neither the Freudians nor the Jungians come right out and say it, they strongly suggest that we may have a core, a simple basic carrier wave, or, to use language with which Jordan is comfortable, a single line of written code which cannot be stripped. The PD, Jordan said, the prime directive. Yes, the head agreed. At bottom, you see, we are not Homo sapiens at all. Our core is madness. The prime directive is murder. What Darwin was too polite to say, my friends, is that we came to rule the earth not because we were the smartest or even the meanest, but because we've always been the craziest, most murderous motherfuckers in the jungle. And that is what the Pulse exposed 5 days ago. Chapter 17. I refuse to believe that we were lunatics and murderers before we were anything else, Tom said. Christ, man, what about the Parthenon? What about Michelangelo's David? What about that plaque on the moon that says, "We came in peace for all mankind"? That plaque also has Richard Nixon's name on it, Arde said dryly, a Quaker but hardly a man of peace. Mr. McCourt, Tom, I have no interest in handing down an indictment of mankind. If I did, I'd point out that for every Michelangelo, there's a Marquis de Sade. For every Gandhi and Eichmann, for every Martin Luther King and Osama bin Laden. Leave it at this. Man has come to dominate the planet thanks to two essential traits. One is intelligence. The other has been the absolute willingness to kill anyone and anything that gets in his way. He leaned forward, surveying them with his bright eyes. Mankind's intelligence finally trumped mankind's killer instinct, and reason came to rule over mankind's maddest impulses. That too was survival. I believe the final showdown between the two may have come in October of 1962 over a handful of missiles in Cuba, but that is a discussion for another day. The fact is, most of us had sublimated the worst in us until the Pulse came along and stripped away everything but that red core. Someone let the Tasmanian devil out of its cage, Alice murmured. Who? That need not concern us either, the head replied. I suspect they had no idea of what they were doing, or how much they were doing. Based upon what must have been hurried experiments over a few years, perhaps even months, they may have thought they would unleash a destructive storm of terrorism. Instead, they unleashed a tsunami of untold violence, and it's mutating. Horrible as the current days may now seem, we may later view them as a lull between one storm and the next. These days may also be our only chance to make a difference. What do you mean mutating? Clay asked. But the head didn't answer. Instead, he turned to 12-year-old Jordan. If you please, young man. Yes. Well, Jordan paused to think. Your conscious mind only uses a tiny percentage of your brain's capacity. You guys know that, right? Yes, Tom said a bit indulgently. So I've read. Jordan nodded. Even when you add in all the autonomic functions they control, plus the subconscious stuff, dreams, blink think, the sex drive, all that jazz. Our brains are barely taking over. Holmes, you astound me, Tom said. Don't be a wise-ass, Tom, Alice said, and Jordan gave her a decidedly starry-eyed smile. I'm not, Tom said. The kid is good. Indeed he is, the headmaster said dryly. Jordan may have occasional problems with the King's English, but he did not get his scholarship for excelling at Tiddlywinks. He observed the boy's discomfort and gave Jordan's hair an affectionate scruff with his bony fingers. Continue, please. Well, Jordan struggled. Clay could see it, and then seemed to find his rhythm again. If your brain really was a hard drive, the can would be almost empty. He saw only Alice understood this. Put it this way, the info strip would say something like 2% in use, 98% available. No one has any real idea what that 98% is for, but there's plenty of potential there. Stroke victims, for instance, they sometimes access previously dormant areas of their brains in order to walk and talk again. It's like their brains wire around the blighted area. The lights go on in a similar area of the brain, but on the other side. You study this stuff? Clay asked. It's a natural outgrowth of my interest in computers and cybernetics, Jordan said, shrugging. Also, I read a lot of cyberpunk science fiction. William Gibson, Bruce Sterling, John Shirley. Neil Stephenson? Alice asked. Jordan grinned radiantly. Neil Stephenson's a god. Back on message, the head chided, but gently. Jordan shrugged. If you wipe a computer hard drive, it can't regenerate spontaneously, except maybe in a Greg Bear novel. He grinned again, but this time it was quick, and Clay thought rather nervous. Part of it was Alice, who clearly knocked the kid out. People are different. But there's a huge leap between learning to walk again after a stroke and being able to power a bunch of boomboxes by telepathy, Tom said. A quantum leap. He looked around self-consciously as the word telepathy came out of his mouth, as if expecting them to laugh. No one did. Yeah, but a stroke victim, even someone who has a bad one, is light years different from what happened to people who were on their cells during the pulse, Jordan replied. Me and the head and I think that in addition to stripping people's brains all the way to that one unerasable line of code, the pulse also kicked something on, something that's probably been sitting inside all of us for millions of years, buried in that 98% of dormant hard drive. Clay's hand stole to the butt of the revolver he had picked up off the floor in Beth Nickerson's kitchen. A trigger, he said. Jordan lit up. Yeah, exactly. A mutative trigger. Mutative. It never could have happened without this, like, total erasure on a grand scale. Because what's emerging, what's building up in those people out there, only they're no longer people. What's building up it's a single organism, the head interrupted. This is what we believe. Yes, but more than just a flock, Jordan said. Because what they can do with the CD players may only be the start. Like a little kid learning to put his shoes on. Think about what they might be able to do in a week or a month or a year. You could be wrong, Tom said, but his voice was as dry as a breaking stick. He could also be right, Alice said. Oh, I'm sure he's right, the head put in. He sipped his spiked hot chocolate. Of course I'm an old man, and my time is almost over in any case. I'll abide by any decision you make. A slight pause. The eyes flicked from Clay to Alice to Tom. As long as it's the right one, of course. Jordan said, the flocks will try to come together, you know. If they don't hear each other already, they will real soon. Crap, Tom said uneasily. Ghost stories. Maybe, Clay said, but here's something to think about. Right now, the nights are ours. What if they decide they need less sleep, or that they're not afraid of the dark? No one said anything for several moments. A wind was rising outside. Clay sipped his hot chocolate, which had never been much more than tepid and was now almost cold. When he looked up again, Alice had put hers aside and was holding her Nike talisman instead. I want to wipe them out, she said. The ones on the soccer field, I want to wipe them out. I don't say kill them because I think Jordan's right, and I don't want to do it for the human race. I want to do it for my mother and my dad, because he's gone too, I know he is. I feel it. I want to do it for my friends, Vicky and Tess. They were good friends, but they had cell phones. They never went anywhere without them. And I know what they're like now and where they're sleeping. Someplace just like that fucking soccer field. She glanced at the head, flushing. Excuse me, sir. The head waved her apology away. Can we do that? She asked him. Can we wipe them out? Charles Arday, who had been winding down his career as GAITEN Academy's interim headmaster when the world ended, bared his eroded teeth in a grin Clay would have given much to have captured with pen or brush. There was not a single ounce of pity in it. Miss Maxwell, we can try, he said. Chapter 18. At 4 o'clock the next morning, Tom McCourt sat on a picnic table between the two GAITEN Academy greenhouses, which had both sustained serious damage since the pulse. His feet, now wearing the Reeboks he'd donned back in Malden, were on one of the benches, and his head lay on his arms, which rested on his knees. The wind blew his hair first one way, then the other. Alice sat across from him with her chin propped on her hands, and the rays of several flashlights striking angles and shadows across her face. The harsh light made her look pretty in spite of her obvious weariness. At her age, all light was still flattering. The head sitting next to her only looked exhausted. In the closer of the two greenhouses, 2 Coleman gas lanterns floated like uneasy spirits. The Colemans converged at the near end of the greenhouse. Clay and Jordan used the door, although huge holes in the glass paneling had been opened on either side. A moment later, Clay sat down next to Tom, and Jordan resumed his usual spot next to the head. The boy smelled of gasoline and fertilizer, even more strongly of dejection. Clay dropped several sets of keys on the table amid the flashlights. As far as he was concerned, they could stay there until some archaeologist discovered them 4 millennia from now. I'm sorry, Headmaster Arday said softly. It seemed so simple. Yeah, Clay said, it had seemed simple. Fill the greenhouse sprayers with gasoline, load the sprayers into the back of a pickup truck, drive across Tawny Field, wetting down both sides as they went, toss a match. He thought to tell RDA that George W. Bush's Iraq adventure had probably looked equally simple. Load the sprayers, toss a match, and didn't. It would have been pointlessly cruel. Tom? Clay asked. You? Okay. He had already realized that Tom didn't have great reserves of stamina. Yeah, just tired. He raised his head and gave Clay a smile. Not used to the night shift. What do we do now? Go to bed, I guess, Clay said. It'll be dawn in another 40 minutes or so. The sky had already begun to lighten in the east. It's not fair, Alice said. She brushed angrily at her cheeks. It's not fair. We tried so hard. They had tried hard, but nothing had come easily. Every small and ultimately meaningless victory had been the sort of maddening struggle his mother had called a Bolshevik. Part of Clay did want to blame the head, also himself, for not taking our day sprayer idea with a grain of salt. Part of him now thought that going along with an elderly English teacher's plan to firebomb a soccer field was a little like taking a knife to a gunfight. Still, yeah, it had seemed like a good idea. Until, they discovered the motor pool's gasoline storage tank was inside a lock shed. They'd spent nearly half an hour in the nearby office, scrounging by lantern light through maddeningly unmarked keys on a board behind the superintendent's desk. It was Jordan who finally found the key that unlocked the shed door. Then they discovered that one would only have to pull a plug was not exactly the case. There was a cap, not a plug, and like the shed in which the tank resided, the cap was locked. Back to the office, another scrounge by lantern light. Finally, a key that did indeed seem to fit the cap. It was Alice who pointed out that since the cap was on the bottom of the tank, assuring gravity feed in case of a power outage, they would have a flood on their hands without a hose or a siphon. They spent an hour looking for a hose that might fit and couldn't find anything that looked even close. Tom found a small funnel, which sent them all into moderate hysterics. And because none of the truck keys were marked, at least in ways non-motor pool employees could understand, locating the right set became another process of trial and error. This one went faster, at least because there were only 8 trucks parked behind the garage. And last, the greenhouses. There they discovered only 8 sprayers, not a dozen, with a capacity of not 30 gallons each, but 10. They might be able to fill them from the gasoline storage tank, but they would be drenched in the process, and the result would be a mere 80 gallons of unusable, sprayable gas. It was the idea of wiping out 1,000 phone crazies with 80 gallons of regular that had driven Tom, Alice, and the head out to the picnic bench. Clay and Jordan had hung in a while longer, looking for bigger sprayers, but they had found none. We found a few little leaf sprayers, though, Clay said. You know what they used to call flit guns? Also, Jordan said, The big sprayers in there are all full of weed killer or plant food or something. We'd have to start by dumping them all out, and that would mean putting on masks just to make sure we didn't gas ourselves or something. Reality bites, Alice said morosely. She looked at her baby sneaker for a moment, then tucked it away in her pocket. Jordan picked up the keys that had matched to one of the maintenance pickups. We could drive downtown, he said. There's a trustworthy hardware. They must have sprayers. Tom shook his head. It's over a mile, and the main drag's full of wrecks and abandoned vehicles. We might be able to get around some, but not all. And driving over the lawns is out of the question. The houses are just too close together. There are reasons everybody's on foot. They had seen a few people on bicycles, but not many. Even the ones equipped with lights were dangerous if ridden at any speed. Would it be possible for a light truck to negotiate the side streets? The head asked. Clay said we could explore the possibility tomorrow night, I suppose. Scout out a path in advance on foot, then come back for the truck. He considered. They'd probably have all sorts of hose in a hardware store, too. You don't sound exactly jazzed, Alice said. Clay sighed. It doesn't take much to block little streets. We'd end up doing a lot of donkey work, even if we got luckier than we did tonight. I just don't know. Maybe it'll look better to me after some rest. Of course it will, the head agreed, but he sounded hollow to all of us. What about the gas station across from the school? Jordan asked without much hope. What gas station? Alice asked. He's talking about the Citgo. The head replied. Same problem, Jordan. Plenty of gasoline in the tanks under the pumps, but no power. And I doubt if they have much in the way of containers beyond a few 2 or 5 gallon gasoline cans. I really think... But he didn't say what he really thought. He broke off. What is it, Clay? Clay was remembering the trio ahead of them, limping past that gas station, one of the men with an arm around the woman's waist. Academy Grove Citgo, he said. That's the name, isn't it? Yes, but they didn't just sell gasoline, I think. He didn't just think, he knew. Because of the 2 trucks parked on the side, he had seen them and hadn't thought anything of them. Not then, he had no reason to. I don't know what you... The head began, then stopped. His eyes met Clay's. His eroded teeth once more made their appearance in that singularly pitiless smile. Oh, he said. Oh my, yes. Tom was looking between them with mounting perplexity. So was Alice. Jordan merely waited. Would you mind telling the rest of us what you two are communing about? Tom asked. Clay was ready to. He already saw how clearly it would work, and it was too good not to share. When the music from Tawny Field died away, it didn't click off as it usually did when they woke up in the morning. It went in a kind of swoop, as if someone had just kicked the source down an elevator shaft. They're up early, Jordan said in a low voice. Tom gripped Clay's forearm. It's not the same, he said, and one of those damn ghetto blasters is still playing. I can hear it very faint. The wind was strong, and Clay knew it was blowing from the direction of a soccer field, because of the ripe smells it carried. Decaying food, decaying flesh, hundreds of unwashed bodies. It also carried the ghostly sound of Lawrence Welk and his champagne music makers playing Baby Elephant Walk. Then, from somewhere to the northwest, maybe 10 miles away, maybe 30, it was hard to tell how far the wind might have carried it, came a spectral, somehow moth-like moaning sound. There was silence, and then the not waking, not sleeping creatures on the tiny soccer field answered in kind. Their moan was much louder, a hollow, belling ghost groan that rose toward the black and starry sky. Alice had covered her mouth. The baby sneaker jutted upward from her hands. Her eyes bulged on either side of it. Jordan had thrown his arms around the head's waist and buried his face against the old man's side. "Look, Clay," Tom said. He got to his feet and tottered toward the grassy aisle between the two shattered greenhouses, pointing at the sky as he went. "Do you see? My gosh, do you see?" To the northwest, from where the distant groan had risen, a reddish-orange glow had bloomed on the horizon. It strengthened as he watched. The wind bore that terrible sound again, and once more it was answered with a similar but much louder groan from Tawny Field. Alice joined them, then the head, walking with his arm around Jordan's shoulders. "What's over there?" Clay asked, pointing toward the glow. It had already begun to wane again. "It might be Glens Falls," the headmaster said, "or it might be Littleton. Wherever it is, there's shrimp on the Barbie," Tom said. "They're burning, and our bunch knows. They heard." "Or felt," Alice said. She shuddered, then straightened and bared her teeth. "I hope they did." As if in answer, there was another groan from Tawny Field, many voices raised as one in a cry of sympathy, and perhaps shared agony. The one boombox, it was the master, Clay assumed, the one with an actual compact disc in it, continued to play. 10 minutes later, the others joined in once more. The music, it was now close to you by the Carpenters, swooped up just as it had previously swooped down. By then, Headmaster Arday, limping noticeably on his cane, had led them back to Cheatham Lodge. Not long after that, the music stopped again, but this time it simply clicked off, as it had the previous morning. From far away, carried across God alone knew how many miles by the wind, came the faint pop of a gunshot. Then the world was eerily and completely silent, waiting for the dark to give place to the day. Chapter 19. As the sun began to spoke its first red rays through the trees on the eastern horizon, they watched the phone crazies once more. They watched the phone crazies once again begin leaving the soccer field in close order patterns, headed for downtown Gaiten and the surrounding neighborhoods. They fanned out as they went, headed downhill toward Academy Avenue, as if nothing untoward had happened near the end of the night. But Clay didn't trust that. He thought they had better do their business at the Sitco station quickly today, if they intended to do it at all. Going out in the daylight might mean shooting some of them, but as long as they only moved en masse at the beginning and end of the day, he was willing to take that risk. They watched what Alice called the dawn of the dead from the dining room. Afterward, Tom and the head went into the kitchen. Clay found them sitting at the table in a bar of sunshine and drinking tepid coffee. Before Clay could begin explaining what he wanted to do later in the day, Jordan touched his wrist. "Some of the crazies are still there," he said, and in a lower voice, "I went to school with some of them." Tom said, "I thought they'd all be shopping Kmart by now, looking for blue light specials." "You better check it out," Alice said from the doorway. "I'm not sure it's another, what would you call it, developmental step forward, but it might be. It probably is." "Sure it is," Jordan said gloomily. The phone crazies who had stayed behind, Clay thought it was a squad of about 100, were removing the dead from beneath the bleachers. At first, they simply carried them off into the parking lot south of the field and behind a long, low brick building. They came back empty-handed. "That building's the indoor track," the head told them. "It's also where all the sports gear is stored. There's a steep drop-off on the far side. I imagine they're throwing the bodies over the edge." "You bet," Jordan said. He sounded sick. "It's all marshy down there. They'll rot." "They were rotting anyway, Jordan," Tom said gently. "I know," he said, sounding sicker than ever. "But they'll rot even faster in the sun." A pause. "Sir?" "Yes, Jordan?" "I saw Noah Chutsky from your drama reading club." The head patted the boy's shoulder. He was very pale. "Never mind." "It's hard not to," Jordan whispered. "He took my picture once with his, you know." Then a new wrinkle. 24 of the worker bees peeled off from the main group with no pause for discussion and headed for the shattered greenhouses, moving in a V shape that reminded the watchers of migrating geese. The one Jordan had identified as Noah Chutsky was among them. The rest of the body removal squad watched them go for a moment, then marched back down the ramps 3 abreast and resumed fishing dead bodies out from under the bleachers. 20 minutes later, the greenhouse party returned, now spread out in a single line. Some were still empty-handed, but most had acquired wheelbarrows or handcarts of the sort used to transport large bags of lime or fertilizer. Soon the phone crazies were using the carts and barrows to dispose of the bodies, and their work went faster. "It's a step forward, all right," Tom said. "More than one," the head added, "cleaning house, using tools to do it." Clay said, "I don't like this." Jordan looked up at him, his face pale and tired and far older than its years. "Join the club," he said. Chapter 20. They slept until 1 in the afternoon. Then, after confirming that The body detail had finished its work and gone to join the rest of the foragers. They went down to the fieldstone pillars, marking the entrance to GAITEN Academy. Alice had scoffed at Clay's idea that he and Tom should do this on their own. "Never mind that Batman and Robin crap," she said. "Oh, my. I always wanted to be the boy wonder," Tom said, with a trace of a lisp. But when she gave him a humorless look, her sneaker, now beginning to look a bit tattered, clasped in one hand, he wilted. "Sorry." "You can go across the gas station on your own," she said. "That much makes sense, but the rest of us will stand lookout on the other side." The head had suggested that Jordan should stay behind at the lodge. Before the boy could respond, and he looked ready to do so hotly, Alice asked, "How are your eyes, Jordan?" He'd given her a smile, once more accompanied by the slightly starry look. "Good. Fine." "And you've played video games? The ones where you shoot?" "Sure, a ton." She handed him her pistol. Clay could see him quiver slightly, like a tapped tuning fork, when their fingers touched. "If I tell you to point and shoot, or if Headmaster Arday tells you, will you do it?" "Sure." Alice had looked at Arday with a mixture of defiance and apology. "We need every hand." The head had given in, and now here they were, and there was the Academy Grove Sitka on the other side of the street, just a little way back toward town. From here, the other slightly smaller sign was easy to read: Academy LP Gas. The single car standing at the pumps, with its driver's door open, already had a dusty, long-deserted look. The gas station's big plate glass window was broken. Off to the right, parked in the shade of what had to be one of northern New England's few surviving elm trees, were two trucks shaped like giant propane bottles. Written on the side of each were the words Academy LP Gas and serving southern New Hampshire since 1982. There was no sign of foraging phone crazies on this part of Academy Avenue, and although most of the houses Clay could see had shoes on their front stoops, several did not. The rush of refugees seemed to be drying up. Too early to tell, he cautioned himself. "Sir, Clay, what's that?" Jordan asked. He was pointing to the middle of the avenue, which of course was still Route 102, although that was easy to forget on this sunny, quiet afternoon, where the closest sounds were birds and the rustle of wind in the leaves. There was something written in bright pink chalk on the asphalt, but from where they were, Clay couldn't make it out. He shook his head. "Are you ready?" he asked Tom. "Sure," Tom said. He was trying to sound casual, but a pulse beat rapidly on the side of his unshaven throat. "You, Batman, me, boy wonder." They trotted across the street, pistols in hand. Clay had left the Russian automatic weapon with Alice, more or less convinced it would spin her around like a top if she actually had to use it. The message scrawled in pink chalk on the macadam was Kashwak equals no foe. "Does that mean anything to you?" Tom asked. Clay shook his head. It didn't, and right now he didn't care. All he wanted was to get out of the middle of Academy Avenue, where he felt as exposed as an ant in a bowl of rice. It occurred to him, suddenly and not for the first time, that he would sell his soul just to know that his son was okay, and in a place where people weren't putting guns into the hands of children who were good at video games. It was strange. He'd think he had his priorities settled, that he was dealing with his personal deck one card at a time, and then these thoughts would come, each as fresh and painful as an unsettled grief. Get out of here, Johnny. You don't belong here. Not your place, not your time. The propane trucks were empty and locked, but that was alright. Today their luck was running the right way. The keys were hanging on a board in the office below a sign reading no towing between midnight and 6 a.m. No exceptions. A tiny propane bottle dangled from each keychain. Halfway back to the door, Tom touched Clay's shoulder. Two phone crazies walked up the middle of the street, side by side, but by no means in lockstep. One was eating Twinkies from a box of them. His face was lathered with cream, crumbs, and frosting. The other, a woman, was holding a coffee table-sized book out in front of her. To Clay, she looked like a choir member holding an oversized hymnal. On the front, there appeared to be a photograph of a collie jumping through a tire swing. The fact that the woman held the book upside down gave Clay some comfort. The vacant, blasted expressions on their faces, and the fact that they were wandering on their own, meaning midday was still in non-flocking time, gave him more. But he didn't like that book. No, he didn't like that book at all. They wandered past the fieldstone pillars, and Clay could see Alice, Jordan, and the head peering out, wide-eyed. The two crazies walked over the cryptic message chalked in the street, Kashwak equals Nova. And the woman reached for her companion's Twinkies. The man held the box away from her. The woman cast her book aside. Parentheses, it landed right side up, and Clay saw it was 100 best loved dogs of the world. Close parentheses. And reached again. The man slapped her face hard enough to make her filthy hair fly. The sound very loud in the stillness of the day. All this time they were walking. The woman made a sound. Oh! The man replied. It sounded to Clay like a reply. Ian! The woman reached for the box of Twinkies. Now they were passing the Sitco. The man punched her in the neck this time, a looping overhand blow, and then dove a hand into his box for another treat. The woman stopped, looked at him, and a moment later the man stopped. He had pulled a bit ahead, so his back was mostly to her. Clay felt something in the sun-warmed stillness of the gas station office. No, he thought, not in the office, in me. Shortness of breath, like after you climb a flight of stairs too fast. Except maybe it was in the office too, because Tom stood on his toes and whispered in his ear, "Do you feel that?" Clay nodded and pointed at the desk. There was no wind, no discernible draft, but the papers there were fluttering, and in the ashtray, the ashes had begun to circle lazily, like water going down a bathtub drain. There were 2 butts in there. No, 3. And The moving ashes seemed to be pushing them toward the center. The man turned toward the woman. He looked back at her. She looked at him. They looked at each other. Clay could read no expression on either face, but he could feel the hairs on his arms stirring, and he heard a faint jingling. It was the keys on the board below the no towing sign. They were stirring too, chittering against each other just the tiniest bit. "Ah," said the woman. She held out her hand. "In," said the man. He was wearing the fading remains of his suit. On his feet were dull black shoes. 6 days ago he might have been a middle manager, salesman, or an apartment complex manager. Now the only real estate he cared about was his box of Twinkies. He held it to his chest, his sticky mouth working. "Ah," the woman insisted. She held out both hands instead of just one, the immemorial gesture signifying, "Gimme!" And the keys were jingling louder. Overhead there was a bzzz, as if fluorescent light for which there was no power flickered and then went out again. The nozzle fell off the middle gas pump and hit the concrete island with a dead metal clank. "Ah," the man said. His shoulders slumped and all the tension went out of him. The tension went out of the air. The keys on the board fell silent. The ashes made one final slowing circuit of their dented metal reliquary and came to a stop. You would not have known anything had happened, Clay thought, if not for the fallen nozzle out there and the little cluster of cigarette butts in the ashtray on the desk in here. "Oh," the woman said. She was still holding out her hands. Her companion advanced to within reach of them. She took a Twinkie in each and began to eat them, wrappings and all. Once more Clay was comforted, but only a little. They resumed their slow shuffle toward town, the woman pausing long enough to spit a filling-caked piece of cellophane from the side of her mouth. She showed no interest in 100 best-loved dogs of the world. "What was that?" Tom asked in a low and shaken voice, when the two of them were almost out of sight. "I don't know, but I didn't like it," Clay said. He had the keys to the propane trucks. He handed one set to Tom. "Can you drive a standard shift?" "I learned on a standard. Can you?" Clay smiled patiently. "I'm straight, Tom. Straight guys know how to drive standards without instruction. It's instinct with us." Very funny. Tom wasn't really listening. He was looking after the departed odd couple, and that pulse in the side of his throat was going faster than ever. End of the world, open season on the queers, why not, right? That's right, it's gonna be open season on straights too, if they get that shit under control. Come on, let's do it. He started out the door, but Tom held him back a minute. "Listen, the others may have felt that over there, or they may not have. If they didn't, maybe we should keep it to ourselves for the time being. What do you think?" Clay thought about how Jordan wouldn't let the head out of his sight, and how Alice always kept the creepy little sneaker somewhere within reach. He thought about the circles under their eyes, and then about what they were planning to do tonight. Armageddon was probably too strong a word for it, but not by much. Whatever they were now, the phone crazies had once been human beings, and burning 1,000 of them alive was burden enough. Even thinking about it hurt his imagination. Fine by me, he said. Go up the hill in low gear, all right? Lowest one I can find, Tom said. They were walking to the big bottle-shaped trucks now. How many gears do you think a truck like that has? One forward should be enough, Clay said. Based on the way they're parked, I think you're going to have to start by finding reverse. Fuck it, Clay said. What good is the end of the world if you can't drive through a gosh darn board fence? And that was what they did. Chapter 21. Academy Slope was what Headmaster Arday and his one remaining pupil called the long rolling hill that dropped from the campus to the main road. The grass was still bright green and only beginning to be littered with fallen leaves. When afternoon gave way to early evening and Academy Slope was still empty, no sign of returning phone crazies, Alice began to pace the main hall of Cheatham Lodge, pausing in each circuit only long enough to look out the bay window of the living room. It offered a fine view of the slope, the two main lecture halls, and Tawny Field. The sneaker was once more tied to her wrist. The others were in the kitchen sipping cokes from cans. They're not coming back, she told them at the end of one of her circuits. They got wind of what we were planning, read our minds or something, and they're not coming. Did I already say Chapter 21? Well, Chapter 21, Academy Slope was what Headmaster, blah, blah, blah. 2 more circuits of the long downstairs hall, each with a pause to look out the big living room window, and then she looked in on them again. Or maybe it's a general migration. Did you guys ever think of that? Maybe they go south in the winter like the robins. She was gone without waiting for a reply. Up the hall and down the hall, up and down the hall. She's like Ahab on the prod for Moby, the head remarked. Eminem might have been a jerk, but he was right about that guy, Tom said morosely. I beg your pardon, Tom? The head asked. Tom waved it away. Jordan glanced at his watch. They didn't come back last night until almost half an hour later than it is right now, he said. I'll go tell her that if you want. I don't think it would do any good, Clay said. She's got to work through it, that's all. She's pretty freaked out, isn't she, sir? Aren't you, Jordan? Yes, Jordan said in a small voice. I'm Freak City. The next time Alice came back to the kitchen, she said, maybe it's best if they don't come back. I don't know if they're rebooting their brains some new way, but for sure there's some bad voodoo going on. I felt it from those 2 this morning. The woman with the book and the man with the Twinkies. She shook her head. Bad voodoo. She plunged off on hall patrol again before anyone could reply, the sneaker swinging from her wrist. The head looked at Jordan. Did you feel anything, son? Jordan hesitated, then said, I felt something. The hair on my neck tried to stand up. Now the head turned his gaze to the men on the other side of the table. What about you two? You were far closer. Alice saved them from having to answer. She ran into the kitchen, her cheeks flushed, her eyes wide, the soles of her sneakers squeaking on the tiles. "They're coming," she said. Chapter 22. From the bay window, the four of them watched the phone crazies come up Academy slope in converging lines, their long shadows making a huge pinwheel shape on the green grass. As they neared what Jordan and the head called Tunny Arch, the lines drew together, and the pinwheel seemed to spin in the late golden sunlight, even as it contracted and solidified. Alice could no longer stand not holding the sneaker. She had torn it from her wrist and was squeezing it compulsively. "They'll see what we did, and they'll turn around," she said, speaking low and rapidly. "They've gotten at least that smart. If they're picking up books again, they must have." "We'll see," Clay said. He was almost positive the phone crazies would go on to Tawny Field, even if what they saw there disquieted their strange group mind. It would be dark soon, and they had nowhere else to go. A fragment of a lullaby his mother used to sing him floated through his mind. "Little man, you've had a busy day." "I hope they go, and I hope they stay," she said, lower than ever. "I feel like I'm going to explode." She gave a wild little laugh. "Only it's them that's supposed to explode, isn't it? Them." Tom turned to look at her, and she said, "I'm alright, I'm fine, so just close your mouth." "All I was going to say is that it'll be what it is," he said. "New Age crap. You sound like my father, the picture frame king." A tear rolled down one cheek, and she rubbed it impatiently away with the heel of her hand. "Just calm down, Alice. Watch." "I'll try, okay? I'll try." "And stop with the sneaker," Jordan said, irritably for him. "That squelchy sound is making me crazy." She looked down at the sneaker as if surprised, then slipped it around her wrist on its loop again. They watched as the phone crazies converged at Tunny Arch and passed beneath it with less pushing and confusion than any crowd attending the homecoming weekend soccer match could ever have equaled. Clay was sure of that. They watched as the crazies spread out again on the far side, crossing the concourse and filing down the ramps. They waited to see that steady march slow and stop, but it never did. The last stragglers, most of them hurt and helping each other along, but still walking in those close groups, were in long before the reddening sun had passed below the dormitories on the west side of the GAITEN Academy campus. They had returned once more, like homing pigeons to their nests, or the swallows to Capistrano. Not 5 minutes after the evening star became visible in the darkening sky, Dean Martin began singing, "Everybody loves somebody sometime." "I was worried for nothing, wasn't I?" Alice said. "Sometimes I'm a putz. That's what my father says." No, the head told her. All the Putzes had cell phones, dear. That's why they're out there and you're in here with us. Tom said, I wonder if Reef's still making out okay. I wonder if Johnny is, Clay said. Johnny and Sharon. Chapter 23. At 10 o'clock on that windy autumn night, under a moon now entering its last quarter, Clay and Tom stood in the band alcove at the home end of the tawny soccer field. Directly in front of them was a waist-high concrete barrier that had been heavily padded on the playing field side. On their side were a few rusting music stands and a drift of litter that was ankle-deep. The wind blew the torn bags and scraps of paper in here, and here they came to rest. Behind and above them, back at the turnstiles, Alice and Jordan flanked the head, a tall figure propped on a slender rod of cane. Debbie Boone's voice rolled across the field in amplified waves of comic majesty. Ordinarily, she would be followed by Leanne Womack singing, I Hope You Dance, then back to Lawrence Welk and his champagne music makers, but perhaps not tonight. The wind was freshening. It brought them the smell of rotting bodies from the marsh behind the indoor track building, and the aroma of dirt and sweat from the living ones packed together on the field beyond the band alcove. If you can call that living, Clay thought, and flashed himself a small and bitter inside smile. Rationalization was a great human sport, maybe the great human sport, but he would not fool himself tonight. Of course they called it living. Whatever they were, or whatever they were becoming, they called it living just as he did. What are you waiting for? Tom murmured. Nothing, Clay murmured back. Just nothing. From the holster Alice had found in the Nickerson basement, Clay drew Beth Nickerson's old-fashioned Colt .45 revolver, now once more fully loaded. Alice had offered him the automatic rifle, which so far they had not even test-fired, and he had refused, saying that if the pistol didn't do the job, probably nothing would. I don't know why the auto wouldn't be better if it squirts 30 or 40 bullets a second, she said. You could turn those trucks into cheese graters. He had agreed that this might be so, but reminded Alice that their objective tonight was not destruction per se, but ignition. Then he'd explained the highly illegal nature of the ammunition Arnie Nickerson had obtained for his wife's 45 fraggers. 45 caliber fraggers? What had once been called dum-dum bullets. Okay, but if it doesn't work, you can still try Sir Speedy, she'd said. Unless the guys out there just, She wouldn't actually use the word attack, but had made a little walking motion with the fingers of the hand not holding the sneaker. In that case, beat feet. The wind tore a tattered strip of homecoming weekend bunting free of the scoreboard and sent it dancing above the packed sleepers. Around the field, seeming to float in the dark, were the red eyes of the boomboxes. all but one playing without benefit of CDs. The bunting struck the bumper of one of the propane trucks, flapped there several seconds, then slipped free and flew off into the night. The trucks were parked side by side in the middle of the field, rising from the massive packed forms like weird metal mesas. The phone crazies slept beneath them and so closely around them that some were crammed up against the wheels. Clay thought again of passenger pigeons and the way 19th century hunters had brained them on the ground with clubs. The whole species had been wiped out by the beginning of the 20th, but of course they had only been birds with little bird brains incapable of rebooting. Clay, Tom asked low, are you sure you want to go through with this? No, Clay said. Now that he was face to face with it, there were too many unanswered questions. What they would do if it went wrong was only one of them. What they would do if it went right was another. Because passenger pigeons were incapable of revenge. Those things out there, on the other hand. But I'm going to. Then do it, Tom said. Because all else aside, you light up my life flows, dead rats in hell. Clay raised the .45 and held his right wrist firmly with his left hand. He centered the gun sight on the tank of the truck on the left. He would fire twice into that one, then twice into the other one. That would leave one more bullet for each, if necessary. If that didn't work, he could try the automatic weapon Alice had taken to calling Sir Speedy. Duck if it goes up, he told Tom. Don't worry, Tom said. His face was drawn into a grimace, anticipating the report of the gun and whatever might follow. Debbie Boone was building to a big finish. It suddenly seemed very important to Clay that he beat her. If you miss at this range, you're a monkey, he thought, and pulled the trigger. There was no chance for a second shot and no need of one. A bright red flower bloomed in the center of the tank, and by its light, he saw a deep dent in the previously smooth metal surface. Hell appeared to be inside and growing. Then the flower was a river, red turning orange-white. Down, he shouted, and pushed Tom's shoulder. He fell on top of the smaller man, just as the night became desert noon. There was a huge whooshing roar, followed by a guttering bang that Clay felt in every bone of his body. Shrapnel shot overhead, he thought. Tom screamed, but he wasn't sure, because there was another of those whooshing roars, and suddenly the air was growing hot, hot, hot. He seized Tom partly by the scruff of the neck and partly by the collar of his shirt and began to drag him backward up the concrete ramp leading to the turnstiles. His eyes slitted almost completely shut against the enormous glare flowing from the center of the soccer field. Something enormous landed in the auxiliary stands to his right. He thought maybe an engine block. He was pretty sure. The shattered bits and twists of metal under his feet had once been GAITEN Academy music stands. Tom was screaming and his glasses were askew, but he was on his feet and he looked intact. The two of them ran up the ramp like escapees from Gomorrah. Clay could see their shadows, long and spider-thin, in front of them, and realized objects were falling all around them. Arms, legs, a piece of bumper, a woman's head with the hair blazing. From behind them came a second tremendous bang, or maybe it was a third, and this time he was the one who screamed. His feet tangled and he went sprawling. The whole world was rapidly building heat and the most incredible light. He felt as if he were standing on God's personal soundstage. We didn't know what we were doing, he thought, looking at a wad of gum, a chomped Junior Mints box, a blue Pepsi-Cola cap. We didn't have a clue, and we're going to pay with our fucking lives. Get up! That was Tom, and he thought Tom was screaming, but his voice seemed to be coming from a mile away. He felt Tom's delicate, long-fingered hands yanking at his arm. Then Alice was there too. Alice was yanking on his other arm, and she was glaring in the light. He could see the sneaker dancing and bobbing from its string on her wrist. She was spattered with blood, bits of cloth, and gobbets of smoking flesh. Clay scrambled up, then went back to Wendy, and Alice hauled him up again by main force. From behind them, Propane roared like a dragon, and here came Jordan with the head tottering along right behind him, his face rosy and every wrinkle running with sweat. "No, Jordan, no, just get him out of the way," Tom yelled. And Jordan pulled the head aside for them, gripping the old man grimly around the waist when he tottered. A burning torso with a ring in its navel landed at Alice's feet, and she booted it off the ramp. 5 years of soccer, Clay remembered her saying. A blazing piece of shirt landed on the back of her head, and Clay swept it aside before it could set her hair on fire. At the top of the ramp, a blazing truck tire with half a sheared-off axle still attached leaned against the last row of reserved seats. If it had landed blocking their way, they might have cooked. The head almost certainly would have. As it was, they were able to slide past, holding their breath against billows of oily smoke. A moment later, they were lurching through the turnstile, Jordan on one side of the head and Clay on the other, the two of them almost carrying the old man along. Clay had his ear boxed twice by the head's flailing cane, but 30 seconds after passing the tire, they were standing beneath Tawny Arch, looking back at the huge column of fire rising above the bleachers and center press box, with identical expressions of stupefied disbelief. A blazing rag of homecoming bunting floated down to the pavement next to the main ticket booth, trailing a few sparks before coming to rest. "Did you know that would happen?" Tom asked. His face was white around the eyes, red across the forehead and cheeks. Half his mustache appeared to have been singed off. Clay could hear his voice, but it sounded distant. Everything did. It was as if his ears had been packed with cotton balls, or the shooter's plugs Beth Nickerson's husband Arnie had no doubt made her wear when he took her to their favorite target range, where they'd probably shot with their cell phones clipped to one hip and their pagers to the other. "Did you know?" Tom attempted to shake him, got nothing but a piece of his shirt, and tore it all the way down the front. fuck now, are you insane? Clay's voice was beyond hoarse, beyond parched. It sounded baked. You think I would have stood there with a pistol if I'd known? If it hadn't been for that concrete barrier, we would have been cut in two or vaporized. Incredibly, Tom began to grin. I tore your shirt, Batman. Clay felt like knocking his head off, also like hugging and kissing him just because he was still alive. I want to go back to the lodge, Jordan said. The fear in his voice was unmistakable. By all means, let us remove to a safe distance, the head agreed. He was trembling badly, his eyes fixed on the inferno, rising above the arch and the bleachers. Thank goodness the wind's blowing toward Academy Slope. Can you walk, sir? Tom asked. Thank you, yes. If Jordan will assist me, I'm sure I can walk as far as the lodge. We got them, Alice said. She was wiping splatters of gore almost absently from her face, leaving smears of blood. Her eyes were like nothing Clay had ever seen, except in a few photographs and some inspired comic art from the 1950s and 60s. He remembered going to a comics convention once, only a kid himself, then, and listening to Wallace Wood talk about trying to draw something he called Panic Eye. Now Clay was seeing it in the face of a 15-year-old suburban schoolgirl. Alice, come on, he said. We have to go back to the lodge and get our shit together. We have to get out of here. As soon as the words were out of his mouth, he had to say them again, and hear if they had the ring of truth. The second time they sounded more than true. They sounded scared. She might not have heard. She looked exultant, stuffed with triumph, sick with it, like a kid who has eaten too much Halloween candy on the way home. The pupils of her eyes were full of fire. Nothing could live through that. Tom gripped Clay's arm. It hurt the way a sunburn hurt. What's wrong with you? I think we made a mistake, Clay said. Is it like in the gas station? Tom asked him. Behind his crooked spectacles, his eyes were sharp. When the man and woman were fighting over the damn No, I just think we made a mistake, Clay said. Actually, it was stronger than that. He knew they had made a mistake. Come on, we have to go tonight. If you say so, okay, Tom said. Come on, Alice. She went with them a little way down the path toward the lodge, where they had left a pair of gas lanterns burning in the big bay window, then turned back for another look. The press box was on fire now, and the bleachers. The stars over the soccer field were gone. Even the moon was nothing but a ghost, dancing a wild jig in the heat haze above that fierce gas jet. They're dead. They're gone. They're crispy, she said. Burn, baby. But that was when the cry rose. Only now it wasn't coming from Glens Falls or Littleton 10 miles away. It was coming from right behind them. Nor was there anything spectral or wraith-like about it. It was a cry of agony, the scream of something, a single entity and aware. Clay was certain of it. That had awakened from a deep sleep to find it was burning alive. Alice shrieked and covered her ears, her eyes bulging in the firelight. Take it back, Jordan said, grasping the head's wrist. Sir, we have to take it back. Too late, Jordan, Arde said. Chapter 24. Their knapsacks were a little plumper as they leaned against the front door of Cheatham Lodge an hour later. There were a couple of shirts in each one, plus bags of trail mix, juice boxes, and packets of Slim Jims, as well as batteries and spare flashlights. Clay had harried Tom and Alice into sweeping their possessions together as quickly as possible, and now he was the one who kept darting into the living room to steal looks out the big window. The gas jet over there was finally starting to burn low, but the bleachers were still blazing, and so was the press box. Tawny Arch itself had caught and glared in the night like a horseshoe in a smithy. Nothing that had been on that field could still be alive. Alice had been right about that much, surely. But twice on their return to the lodge, parentheses, the head shambling like an old drunk, in spite of their best efforts to support him, close parentheses. They had heard those ghostly cries coming down the wind from other flocks. Clay told himself he didn't hear anger in those cries. It was just his imagination, his guilty imagination, his murderer's imagination, his mass murderer's imagination. But he didn't completely believe it. It had been a mistake, but what else could they have done? He and Tom had felt their gathering power just that afternoon, had seen it, and that had been only two of them, just two. How could they have let that go on, just let it grow? Damned if you do, damned if you stand pat, he said, under his breath, and turned from the window. He didn't even know how long he'd been looking at the burning stadium, and resisted the urge to check his watch. It would be easy to give in to the panic rat. He was close to it now, and if he gave in, it would travel to the others quickly, starting with Alice. Alice had managed to get herself back under some sort of control, but it was thin enough to read a newspaper through, his bingo-playing mother might have said. Although a kid herself, Alice had managed to keep herself shiny side up, mostly for the other kid's sake, so he wouldn't give way entirely. The other kid, Jordan. Clay hurried back into the front hall, noted there was still no fourth pack by the door, and saw Tom coming down the stairs, alone. "Where's the kid?" Clay asked. His ears had started to clear a little, but his voice still sounded too far away, and like a stranger's. He had an idea that was going to continue for a while. "You were supposed to be helping him put some stuff together. Arde said he brought a pack over with him from that dorm of his." "He won't come." Tom rubbed the side of his face. He looked tired, sad, distracted. With half his mustache gone, he looked ludicrous as well. "What?" "Lower your voice, Clay. I don't make the news, I just report it." "Then tell me what you're talking about, for Christ's sake." "He won't go without the head. He said you can't make me. And if you're really serious about going tonight, I believe he's right." Alice came tearing out of the kitchen. She had washed up, tied her hair back, and put on a new shirt. It hung almost to her knees, but her skin glowed with the same burn Clay felt on his own. He supposed they should count themselves lucky that they weren't popping blisters. "Alice," he began, "I need you to exercise your womanly powers over Jordan. He's being..." She steamed past, as if he hadn't spoken, fell on her knees, seized her pack, and tore it open. He watched, perplexed, as she began to pull out the stuff inside. He looked at Tom and saw an expression of understanding and sympathy dawning on Tom's face. "What?" Clay asked. "What, for Christ's sake?" He had felt an all too similar exasperated annoyance towards Sharon during the last year they'd actually lived together, had felt it often, and hated himself for having that pop up now of all times. But damn it, another complication was the last thing they needed now. He ran his hands through his hair. "What?" "Look at her wrist," Tom said. Clay looked. The dirty piece of shoestring was still there, but the sneaker was gone. He felt an absurd sinking in his stomach, or maybe it wasn't so absurd. If it mattered to Alice, he supposed it mattered, so what if it was just a sneaker? The spare t-shirt and sweatshirt she had packed, parentheses GAITEN Boosters Club, printed across the front, close parentheses, went flying. Batteries rolled. Her spare flashlight hit the tile floor, and the lens cover cracked. That was enough to convince Clay. This wasn't a Sharon Riddell tantrum because they were out of hazelnut coffee or chunky monkey ice cream. This was unvarnished terror. He went to Alice, knelt beside her, and took hold of her wrists. He could feel the seconds flying by, turning into minutes they should have been using to put this town behind them. But he could also feel the lightning sprint of her pulse under his fingers, and he could see her eyes. It wasn't panic in them now, but agony. And he realized she'd put everything in that sneaker. Her mother and father, her friends, Beth Nickerson and her daughter, the Tawnyfield Inferno, everything. "It's not in here," she cried. "I thought I must have packed it, but I didn't. I can't find it anywhere." "No, honey, I know." Clay was still holding her wrists. Now he lifted the one with the shoelaces around it. "Do you see?" He waited until he was sure her eyes had focused. Then he flipped the ends beyond the knot, where there had been a second knot. "It's too long now," she said. "It wasn't that long before." Clay tried to remember the last time he'd seen the sneaker. He told himself it was impossible to remember a thing like that, given all that had been going on. Then realized he could, very clearly too. It was when she'd helped Tom pull him up after the second truck had exploded. It had been dancing from its string then. She'd been covered with blood, scraps of cloth, and little chunks of flesh, but the sneaker had still been on her wrist. He tried to remember if it was still there when she'd booted the burning torso off the ramp. He didn't think so. Maybe that was hindsight, but he didn't think so. "It came untied, honey," he said. "It came untied and fell off." "I lost it?" Her eyes unbelieving the first tears, Are you sure? Pretty sure I am. It was my luck, she whispered, the tears spilling over. No, Tom said, and put an arm around her. We're your luck. She looked at him. How do you know? Because you found us first, Tom said, and we're still here. She hugged them both, and they stood that way for a while, the three of them, with their arms around each other, in the hall with Alice's few possessions scattered around their feet. Chapter 25. The fire spread to a lecture building they had identified as Hackery Hall. Then, around 4 a.m., the wind dropped away and it spread no farther. When the sun came up, the Gaiten campus stank of propane, charred wood, and a great many burnt bodies. The bright sky of a perfect New England morning in October was obscured by a rising column of gray-black smoke, and Cheatham Lodge was still occupied. In the end, it had been like dominoes. The head couldn't travel except by car. Car travel was impossible, and Jordan would not go without the head. Nor was Arda able to persuade him. Alice, though resigned to the loss of her talisman, refused to go without Jordan. Tom would not go without Alice, and Clay was loath to go without the two of them, although he was horrified to find these newcomers in his life seemed at least temporarily more important than his own son. And although he continued to feel certain that they would pay a high price for what they'd done on Tunnyfield if they stayed in Gaiten, let alone at the scene of the crime, he thought he might feel better about that last at daybreak, but he did not. The five of them watched and waited at the living room window, but of course nothing came out of the smoldering wreckage, and there was no sound but the low crackle of fire eating deep into the athletic department offices and locker rooms, even as it finished off the bleachers above ground. The 1,000 or so phone crazies who had been roosting there were, as Alice had said, crispy. The smell of them was rich and stick in your throat awful. Clay had vomited once and knew the others had as well, even the head. We made a mistake, he thought again. You guys should have gone on, Jordan said. We would have been all right. We were before, weren't we, sir? Headmaster Arday ignored the question. He was studying Clay. What happened yesterday when you and Tom were in that service station? I think something happened then to make you look as you do now. Oh, how do I look, sir? Like an animal that smells a trap. Did those two in the street see you? It wasn't exactly that, Clay said. He didn't love being called an animal, but couldn't deny that was what he was. Oxygen and food in, carbon dioxide and poop out. Pop goes the weasel. The head had begun to rub restlessly at the left side of his midsection with one big hand. Like many of his gestures, Clay thought it had an oddly theatrical quality. Not exactly phony, but meant to be seen at the back of the lecture hall. Then what exactly was it? And because protecting the others no longer seemed like an option, Clay told the head exactly what they'd seen in the office of the Sitco station. A physical struggle over a box of stale treats that had suddenly turned into something else. He told about the fluttering papers, the ashes that had begun circling in the ashtray like water going down a bathtub drain, the keys jingling on the board, the nozzle that fell off the gas pump. I saw that, Jordan said, and Alice nodded. Tom mentioned feeling short of breath, and Clay agreed. They both tried to explain the sense of something powerful building in the air. Clay said it was how things felt before a thunderstorm. Tom said the air just felt fraught somehow, too heavy. Then he let her take a couple of the fucking things, and it all went away, Tom said. The ashes stopped spinning. The keys stopped jingling. That thundery feeling went out of the air. He looked to Clay for confirmation. Clay nodded. Alice said, "Why didn't you tell us this before?" "Because it wouldn't have changed anything," Clay said. "We were going to burn the nest if we could, regardless." "Yes," Tom said. Jordan said suddenly, "You think the phone crazies are turning into psionics, don't you?" Tom said, "I don't know what that word means, Jordan." "People who can move things around just by thinking about it, for one thing, or by accident, if their emotions get out of control. Only psionic abilities like telekinesis and levitation." "Levitation?" Alice almost barked. Jordan paid no mind. "Are only branches. The trunk of the psionic tree is telepathy, and that's what you're afraid of, isn't it? The telepathy thing." Tom's fingers went to the place above his mouth, where half his mustache was gone, and touched the reddened skin there. "Well, a thought has crossed my mind." He paused, head cocked. "That might be witty, I'm not sure." Jordan ignored this as well. "Say that they are. Getting to be true telepaths, I mean, and not just zombies with flocking instinct. So what? The GAITEN Academy flock is dead, and they died without a clue of who lit them up, 'cause they died in whatever passes for sleep with them. So, if you're worrying that they telepathically faxed our names and descriptions to any of their buddies in the surrounding New England states, you can relax." Jordan, the head began, then winced. He was still rubbing his midsection. "Sir, are you all right?" "Yes. Fetch my Zantac from the downstairs bathroom, would you? And a bottle of the Poland Springs water. There's a good lad." Jordan hurried away on the errand. "Not an ulcer, is it?" Tom asked. "No," the head replied, "it's stress. An old, one cannot say friend, acquaintance." "Your heart okay?" Alice asked, speaking in a low voice. "I suppose," the head agreed, and bared his teeth in a smile of disconcerting jollity. "If the Zantac doesn't work, we may resuppose. But so far the Zantac always has, and one doesn't care to buy trouble when so much of it is on sale." "Ah, Jordan, thank you." "Quite welcome, sir." The boy handed him the glass and the pill with his usual smile. "I think you ought to go with them," Arde told him after swallowing the Zantac. "Sir, with all respect, I'm telling you there's no way they could know. No way." The head looked a question at Tom and Clay. Tom raised his hands. Clay only shrugged. He could say what he felt right out loud, could articulate what they surely must know he felt. We made a mistake, and staying here is compounding it. But saw no point. Jordan's face was set and stubborn on top, scared to death just beneath. They were not going to persuade him, and besides, it was day again. Day was their time. He rumpled the boy's hair. "If you say so, Jordan, I'm going to catch some winks." Jordan looked almost sublimely relieved. "That sounds like a good idea. I think I will too." "I think I'm going to have a cup of Cheatham Lodge's world-famous tepid cocoa before I come up," Tom said. "And I believe I'll shave off the rest of this mustache. The wailing and lamentation you hear will be mine." "Can I watch?" Alice asked. "I always wanted to watch a grown man wail and lament." Chapter 26. Clay and Tom were sharing a small bedroom on the 3rd floor. Alice had been given the only other. While Clay was taking off his shoes, there was a perfunctory knock on the door, which the head followed without pause. 2 bright spots of color burned high up on his cheekbones. Otherwise, his face was deathly pale. "Are you all right?" Clay asked, standing. "Is it your heart, after all?" "I'm glad you asked me that," the head replied. "I wasn't entirely sure I planted the seed, but it seems I did." He glanced back over his shoulder into the hall, then closed the door with the tip of his cane. "Listen carefully, Mr. Adele." "Clay, and don't ask questions until you feel you absolutely must. I am going to be found dead in my bed late this afternoon or early this evening, and you will say, of course, it was my heart after all, that what we did last night must have brought it on. Do you understand?" Clay nodded. He understood, and he bit back the automatic protest. It might have had a place in the old world, but it had none here. He knew why the head was proposing what he was proposing. "If Jordan even suspects I may have taken my own life to free him from what he, in his boyishly admirable way, regards as a sacred obligation, he may take his own. At the very least, he would be plunged into what the elders of my own childhood called a black fugue. He will grieve for me deeply as it is, but that is permissible. The thought that I committed suicide to get him out of Gaiten is not. Do you understand that?" "Yes," Clay said. "Then, sir, wait another day. What you're thinking of, it may not be necessary. Could be we're going to get away with this." He didn't believe it. In any case, our day meant to do it, he said. All the truth Clay needed was in the man's haggard face, tightly pressed lips, and gleaming eyes. Still, he tried again. "Wait another day. No one may come." "You heard those screams," the head replied. "That was rage. They'll come." "Maybe, but—" The head raised his cane to forestall him. "And if they do, and if they can read our minds as well as each other's, what will they read in yours if yours is still here to be read?" Clay didn't reply, only watched the head's face. "Even if they can't read minds," the head continued, "what do you propose? To stay here day after day and week after week until the snow flies? Until I finally expire of old age? My own father lived to the age of 97. Meanwhile, you have a wife and a child. My wife and boy are either all right or they're not. I've made my peace with that." This was a lie, and perhaps Sarday saw it in Clay's face, because he smiled his unsettling smile. "And do you believe your son has made peace with not knowing if his father is alive, dead, or insane, after only a week?" "That's a low blow," Clay said. His voice was not quite steady. "Really? I didn't know we were fighting. In any case, there's no referee. No one here but us chickens, as they say." The head glanced at the closed door, then looked back at Clay again. "The equation is very simple. You can't stay, and I can't go. It's best that Jordan go with you. But to put you down like a horse with a broken leg?" "No such thing," the head interrupted. "Horses do not practice euthanasia, but people do." The door opened, Tom stepped in, and with hardly a pause for breath, the head went on. "And have you ever considered commercial illustration, Clay? For books, I mean?" "My style is too flamboyant for most of the commercial houses," Clay said. "I have done jackets for some of the small fantasy presses like Grant and Eulalia, some of the Edgar Rice Burroughs Mars books." "Barsoom," the head cried and waved his cane vigorously in the air. Then he rubbed his solar plexus and grimaced. "Damn heartburn. Excuse me, Tom. Just came up to have a natter before lying down a bit myself." "Not at all," Tom said, and watched him go out. When the sound of the head's cane had gotten a good distance down the hall, he turned to Clay and said, "Is he okay? He's very pale." "I think he's fine." He pointed at Tom's face. "I thought you were going to shave off the other half." "I decided against it with Alice hanging around," Tom said. "I like her, but about certain things she can be evil." "That's just paranoia." "Thanks, Clay. I needed that. It's only been a week and I'm already missing my analyst." Combined with a persecution complex and delusions of grandeur, Clay swung his feet up onto one of the room's two narrow beds, put his hands behind his head, and looked at the ceiling. "You wish we were out of here, don't you?" Tom asked. "You bet I do." He spoke in a flat and uninflected monotone. "It'll be all right, Clay, really." "So you say, but you have a persecution complex and delusions of grandeur." "That's true," Tom said, "but they're balanced out by poor self-image and ego menstruation at roughly 6-week intervals. And in any case, too late now, at least for today," Clay finished. "That's right." There was actually a kind of peace in that. Tom said something else, but Clay only caught "Jordan thinks," and then he was asleep. Chapter 27. He woke screaming, or so he thought at first. Only a wild look at the other bed, where Tom was still sleeping peacefully with something, a washcloth maybe, folded over his eyes, convinced Clay that the scream had been inside his head. A cry of some sort might have escaped him, but if so, it hadn't been enough to wake his roommate. The room was nowhere near dark. It was mid-afternoon, but Tom had pulled the shade before corking off himself, and it was at least dim. Clay stayed where he was for a moment, lying on his back, his mouth as dry as wood shavings, his heartbeat rapid in his chest and in his ears, where it sounded like running footsteps muffled in velvet. Otherwise, the house was dead still. They might not have made the switch over from days to nights completely yet, but last night had been extraordinarily exhausting, and at this moment he heard no one stirring in the lodge. Outside, a bird called, and somewhere quite distant, not in Gaitan, he thought, a stubborn alarm kept on braying. Had he ever had a worse dream? Maybe one. A month or so after Johnny was born, Clay had dreamed he'd picked the baby up from the crib to change him, and Johnny's chubby little body had simply fallen apart in his hands like a badly put-together dummy. That one he could understand. Fear of fatherhood, fear of fucking up. A fear he still lived with, as Headmaster Arday had seen. What was he to make of this one? Whatever it meant, he didn't want to lose it. And he knew from experience that he had to act quickly to keep that from happening. There was a desk in the room and a ballpoint pen tucked into one pocket of the jeans Clay had left crumpled at the foot of the bed. He took the pen, crossed to the desk in his bare feet, sat down and opened the drawer above the knee-hole. He found what he was hoping for. A little pile of blank stationery with the heading GAITEN ACADEMY and A Young Mind is a Lamp in the Darkness on each sheet. He took one of them and placed it on the desk. The light was dim but would serve. He clicked out the tip of the ballpoint and paused for just a moment, recalling the dream as clearly as he could. He, Tom, Alice, and Jordan had been lined up in the center of a playing field. Not a soccer field like Tunney. A football field, maybe. There had been some sort of skeletal construction in the background, with a blinking red light on it. He had no idea what it was, but he knew the field had been full of people looking at them. People with ruined faces and ripped clothes that he recognized all too well. He and his friends had they been in cages? No, on platforms. And they were cages all the same, although there were no bars. Clay didn't know how that could be, but it was. He was losing the details of the dream already. Tom was on one end of the line. A man had walked to him, a special man, and put a hand over his head. Clay didn't remember how the man could do that, since Tom, like Alice, Jordan, and Clay himself, had been on a platform, but he had. And he'd said, Ecce homo insanus. And the crowd, thousands of them, had roared back, "Don't touch!" in a single voice. The man had gone to Clay and repeated this. With his hand above Alice's head, the man had said, Ecce femina insana. Above Jordan, Ecce puer, P-U-E-R, insanus. Each time the response had been the same, "Don't touch!" Neither the man, the host, the ringmaster, nor the people in the crowd had opened their mouths during this ritual. The call and response had been purely telepathic. Then, letting his right hand do all the thinking, his hand in the special corner of his brain that ran it, Clay began to stroke an image onto the paper. The entire dream had been terrible, the false accusation of it, the caughtness of it. But nothing in it had been so awful as the man who had gone to each of them, placing his open palm down hand over their heads like an auctioneer preparing to sell livestock at a county fair. Clay felt that if he could catch that man's image on paper, he could catch the terror. He had been a black man with a noble head and an ascetic's face above a lanky, almost scrawny body. The hair was a tight cap of dark ringlets, cut open on one side by an ugly triangular gouge. The shoulders were slight, the hips nearly non-existent. Below the cap of curls, Clay quick sketched the broad and handsome forehead, a scholar's forehead. Then he marred it with another slash and shaded in the hanging flap of skin that obscured one eyebrow. The man's left cheek had been torn open, possibly by a bite, and the lower lip was also torn on that side, making it droop in a tired sneer. The eyes were a problem. Clay couldn't get them right. In the dream, they had been both full of awareness, yet somehow dead. After 2 tries, he left them and dropped the pullover before he lost that. The kind the kids called a hoodie. Parentheses red he printed with an arrow, close parentheses, with white block letters across the front. It had been too big for the skinny body, and a flap of material lay over the top half of the letters. But Clay was pretty sure it said Harvard. He was starting to print that when the weeping started, soft and muffled, from somewhere below him. Chapter 28. It was Jordan. Clay knew it once. He took one look back over his shoulder at Tom as he pulled on his jeans, but Tom hadn't moved. Ouch. Out for the count, Clay thought. He opened the door, slipped through, and closed it behind him. Alice, wearing a GAITEN Academy t-shirt as a nightgown, was sitting on the second-floor landing with the boy cradled in her arms. Jordan's face was pressed against her shoulder. She looked up at the sound of Clay's bare feet on the stairs and spoke. Before Clay said something he might have regretted later. Is it Dad? He had a bad dream, she said. Clay said the first thing that came to him. At that moment, it seemed vitally important. Did you? Her brow creased. Bare-legged, with her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and her face sunburned, as if from a day at the beach, she looked like Jordan's 11-year-old sister. What? No, I heard him crying in the hall. I guess I was waking up anyway, and just a minute, Clay said, stay right there. He went back to his third-floor room and snatched his sketch off the desk. This time Tom's eyes sprang open. He looked around with a mixture of fright and disorientation, then fixed on Clay and relaxed. Back to reality, he said, then rubbing a hand over his face and getting up on one elbow. Thank goodness. Jesus, what time is it? Tom, did you have a dream? A bad dream? Tom nodded. I think so, yeah. I heard crying. Was that Jordan? Yes. What did you dream? Do you remember? Somebody called us insane, Tom said. And Clay felt his stomach drop. which we probably are. The rest is gone. Why? Did you? Clay didn't wait for any more. He hurried back out and down the stairs again. Jordan looked around him with the kind of dazed timidity when Clay sat down. There was no sign of the computer whiz now. If Alice looked 11 with her ponytail and sunburn, Jordan had regressed to 9. Jordan, Clay said, your dream, your nightmare. Do you remember it? It's going away now, Jordan said. They had us up on stands. They were looking at us like we were, wild animals. Only they said that we were insane. Jordan's eyes widened. Yeah. Clay heard footfalls behind him as Tom came down the stairs. Clay didn't look around. He showed Jordan his sketch. Was this the man in charge? Jordan didn't answer. He didn't have to. He winced away from the picture, grabbing for Alice and turning his face against her chest again. What is it? Alice asked, bewildered. She reached for the sketch, but Tom took it first. Christ, he said, and handed it back. The dream's almost gone, but I remember the torn cheek. And his lip, Jordan said. The words muffled against Alice's chest. The way his lip hangs down, he was the one showing us to them. To them, he shuddered. Alice rubbed his back, then crossed her hands over his shoulder blades so she could hold him more tightly. Clay put the picture in front of Alice. Ring any bells? Man of your dreams? She shook her head and started to say no. Before she could, there was a loud, protracted rattling and a loose series of thuds from outside Cheatham Lodge's front door. Alice screamed. Jordan clutched her tighter, as if he would burrow into her, and cried out. Tom clutched at Clay's shoulder. Oh, man, what the fuck? There was more rattling thunder outside the door, long and loud. Alice screamed again. Guns, Clay shouted. Guns! For a moment, they were all paralyzed there on the sunny landing. And then another of those long, loud rattles came, a sound like rolling bones. Tom bolted for the 3rd floor, and Clay followed him, skidding once in his stocking feet and grabbing the banister to regain his balance. Alice pushed Jordan away from her and ran for her own room, the hem of the shirt fluttering around her legs, leaving Jordan to huddle against the newel post, staring down the stairs and into the front hall with huge wet eyes. Chapter 29. Easy, Clay said. Let's just take this easy, okay? The 3 of them stood at the foot of the stairs, not 2 minutes after the first of those long, loose, rattling sounds had come from beyond the front door. Tom had the unproven Russian assault rifle they had taken to Collins, her Speedy. Alice was holding a 9mm automatic in each hand, and Clay had Beth Nickerson's .45, which she had somehow managed to hold on to the previous night. Parentheses, although he had no memory of tucking it back into his belt, where he later found it, close parentheses. Jordan still huddled on the landing. Up there he couldn't see the downstairs window, and Clay thought that was probably a good thing. The afternoon light in Cheatham Lodge was much dimmer than it should have been, and that was most definitely not a good thing. It was dimmer because there were phone crazies at every window they could see, crowded up to the glass and peering in at them. Dozens, maybe hundreds of those strange blank faces, most marked by the battles they had been through and the wounds they had suffered during the last anarchic week. Clay saw missing eyes and teeth, torn ears, bruises, burns, scorched skin, and hanging wads of blackened flesh. They were silent. There was a kind of haunted avidity about them, and that feeling was back in the air, that breathless sense of some enormous, spinning power barely held in check. Clay kept expecting to see their guns fly out of their hands and begin to fire on their own. At us, he thought. Now I know how the lobsters feel in the tank at Harbor Seafood on 2 for Tuesday, Tom said in a small, tight voice. Just take it easy, Clay repeated. Let them make the first move. But there was no first move. There was another of those long, rattling thumps. The sound of something being offloaded on the front porch is what it sounded like to Clay. And then the creatures at the windows drew back, as if at some signal only they could hear. They did this in orderly rows. This wasn't the time of day during which they ordinarily flocked, but things had changed. That seemed obvious. Clay walked to the bay window in the living room, holding the revolver at his side. Tom and Alice followed. They watched the phone crazies, parentheses, who no longer seemed crazy at all to Clay, at least not in any way he understood, close parentheses, retreat, walking backward with eerie, limber ease, each never losing the little envelope of space around him or herself. They settled to a stop between Cheatham Lodge and the smoking remains of the Tawny Soccer Stadium, like some raggedy-ass army battalion on a leaf-strewn parade ground. Every not quite vacant eye rested upon the headmaster's residence. Why are their hands and feet all smudgy? A timid voice asked. They looked around. It was Jordan. Clay himself hadn't even noticed the soot and char on the hands of the silent hundreds out there. But before he could say so, Jordan answered his own question. They went to see, didn't they? Sure. They went to see what we did to their friends. And they're mad. I can feel it. Can you feel it? Clay didn't want to say yes, but of course he could. That heavy, charged feeling in the air, that sense of turning thunder barely contained in a net of electricity, that was rage. He thought about Pixie Light battening on Power Suit Woman's neck, and the elderly lady who'd won the Battle of the Boylston Street Tea Station, the one who'd gone striding off into Boston Common with blood dripping out of her cropped iron gray hair. The young man, naked except for his sneakers, who'd been jabbing a car aerial in each hand as he ran. All that rage. Did he think it had just disappeared when they started to flock? Well, think again. I feel it, Tom said. Jordan, if they've got psychic powers, why don't they just make us kill ourselves? Or each other? Or make our heads explode? Alice said. Her voice was trembling. I saw that in an old movie once. I don't know, Jordan said. He looked up at Clay. Where's the Raggedy Man? Is that what you call him? Clay looked down at his sketch, which he was still carrying. The torn flesh, the torn sleeve of the pullover, the baggy blue jeans. He supposed that Raggedy Man was not a bad name at all for the fellow in the Harvard hoodie. I call him Trouble, is what I call him, Jordan said in a thin voice. He looked out again at the newcomers, 300 at least, maybe 400, recently arrived from who knew which surrounding towns, and then back at Clay. Have you seen him? Other than in a bad dream? No. Tom shook his head. To me, he's just a picture on a piece of paper, Alice said. I didn't dream him, and I don't see anyone in a hoodie out there. What were they doing on the soccer field? Do they try to identify their dead, do you think? She looked doubtful at this. And isn't it still hot in there? It must be. What are they waiting for? Tom asked. If they aren't going to charge us or make us stick kitchen knives in each other, what are they waiting for? Clay suddenly knew what they were waiting for, and also where Jordan's Raggedy Man was. It was what Mr. Devane, his high school algebra teacher, would have called an aha moment. He turned and headed for the front hall. Where are you going? Tom asked. To see what they left us, Clay said. They hurried after him. Tom caught up first while Clay's hand was still on the doorknob. I don't know if this is a good idea, Tom said. Maybe not, but it's what they're waiting for, Clay said. And you know what? I think if they meant to kill us, we'd be dead already. He's probably right, Jordan said in a small, wan voice. Clay opened the door. Cheatham Lodge's long front porch, with its comfortable wicker furniture and its view of Academy Slope rolling down to Academy Avenue, was made for sunny autumn afternoons like this. But at that moment, the ambiance was the furthest thing from Clay's mind. Standing at the front of the steps was an arrowhead of phone crazies. 1 in front, 2 behind him, 3 behind him, then 4, 5, and 6, 21 in all. The one in front was the Raggedy Man from Clay's dream, his sketch come to life. The lettering on the front of the tattered red hoodie did indeed spell out Harburn. The torn left cheek had been pulled up and secured at the side of the nose with 2 clumsy white stitches that had torn teardrops in the indifferently mended dark flesh before holding. There were rips where a 3rd and 4th stitch had pulled free. Clay thought the stitching might have been done with fish line. The sagging lip revealed teeth that looked as if they had been seen to by a good orthodontist not long ago, when the world had been a milder place. In front of the door, burying the welcome mat and spreading in both directions, was a heap of black, misshapen objects. It could almost have been some half-mad sculptor's idea of art. It took Clay only a moment to realize he was looking at the melted remains of the tawny field blocks ghetto blasters. Then Alice shrieked. A few of the heat-warped boomboxes had fallen over when Clay opened the door, and something that had very likely been balanced on top of the pile had fallen over with them, lodging half in and half out of the pile. She stepped forward before Clay could stop her, dropping one of the automatic pistols and grabbing the thing she had seen. It was a sneaker. She cradled it between her breasts. Clay looked past her at Tom. Tom gazed back at him. They weren't telepathic, but in that moment they might as well have been. Now what? Tom's eyes asked. Clay turned his attention back to the Raggedy Man. He wondered if you could feel your mind being read, and if his was being read right that second. He put his hands out to the Raggedy Man. The gun was still in one of them, but neither the Raggedy Man nor anyone in his squad seemed to feel threatened by it. Clay held his palms up. "What do you want?" The Raggedy Man smiled. There was no humor in the smile. Clay thought he could see anger in the dark brown eyes, but he thought it was a surface thing. Underneath there was no spark at all, at least that he could discern. It was almost like watching a doll smile. The Raggedy Man cocked his head and held up a finger. "Wait." And from below them on Academy Avenue, as if on cue, came many screams. Screams of people in mortal agony. Accompanying them were a few guttural predatory cries. Not many. "What are you doing?" Alice shouted. She stepped forward, squeezing the little sneaker convulsively in her hand. The cords in her forearm stood out strongly enough to make shadows like long, straight pencil strokes on her skin. "What are you doing to the people down there?" As if Clay thought there could be any doubt. She raised the hand that still held a gun. Tom grabbed it and wrestled it away from her before she could pull the trigger. She turned on him, clawing at him with her free hand. "Give it back! Don't you hear that? Don't you hear?" Clay pulled her away from Tom. During all this, Jordan watched from the entryway with wide, terrified eyes, and the Raggedy Man stood at the tip of the arrow, smiling from a face where rage underlay humor, and beneath the rage was nothing as far as Clay could tell. Nothing at all. "Safety was on anyway," Tom said, after a quick glance. "Thank the Lord for small favors." And to Alice, "Do you want to get us killed?" "Do you think they're just going to let us go?" She was crying so hard, it had become difficult to understand her. Snot hung from her nostrils in 2 clear strings. From below on the tree-lined avenue that ran past GAITEN Academy, there were screams and shrieks. A woman cried, "No, please don't," and then her words were lost in a terrible howl of pain. "I don't know what they're going to do with us," Tom said, in a voice that strove for calm. "But if they meant to kill us, they wouldn't be doing that. Look at him, Alice. What's going on down there is for our benefit." There were a few gunshots as people tried to defend themselves, but not many. Mostly there were just screams of pain and terrible surprise, all coming from the area directly adjacent to GAITEN Academy where the flock had been burned. It surely didn't last any longer than 10 minutes, but sometimes Clay thought time really was relative. It seemed like hours.